Okay, so imagine a language, right, where whistling, it's not just a way to get someone's attention. It's like actually part of the words themselves.
Wow.
That's Shona for you.
Yeah.
And today we're
Ooh.
taking you on a deep dive into this fascinating language.
What's remarkable is how these whistled sounds, they're not just like a quirky addition, they're like woven into how the words are pronounced.
You sent us a file about Shona.
Yes.
Smart move, by the way, because even we were blown away by some of this stuff.
Right.
And you're not alone if you're thinking, where do I even begin with a language this unique? But don't worry, we're here to guide you through it. Whether you're a linguistics enthusiast, maybe you're planning a trip to Zimbabwe, that's where it's most widely spoken, or you're just curious.
Or maybe a bit of all three.
Exactly. This deep dive is for you. Now, let's start with the basics. Shona is spoken by over 14 million people, primarily in Zimbabwe, and it belongs to the Bantu language family, a huge, huge family tree of languages spread across Africa.
And like any family tree, it gets pretty interesting when we look at Shona's branches. There's a distinction, you see, between Shona as a broad term, and that encompasses many dialects, and then Standard Shona, which was formalized in the 20th century. Think of it like English. We have various dialects, but then there's standardized, proper English we learn in school.
So how did this Standard Shona come about? It sounds like there's a story there.
A fascinating one. In the 1920s, the Rhodesian administration wanted to standardize education. So they brought in linguists to create this one official version from all the regional variations. And this wasn't just about textbooks. This standardization effort was like planting a seed for Shona literature to grow, which we'll get into later.
It's amazing how language can be shaped by these historical forces. But before we get ahead of ourselves, what about Shona's linguistic siblings? The source mentions languages like Ndau and Kalanga, even connections to Swahili. How close are these languages?
It's a spectrum of closeness. It's like, imagine you and your siblings. You might share inside jokes, understand each other's slang, something outsiders wouldn't get. That's Shona with Ndau and Kalanga. They were once considered Shona dialects, but now they're recognized as distinct languages.
So they've kind of gone their own way, linguistically speaking.
Exactly. And Swahili is more like a distant cousin. You can see the family resemblance, some shared grammatical features from their Bantu roots, but you wouldn't necessarily understand a full conversation.
Now, if I were to sign up for Shona 101, and after this deep dive, I'm seriously considering it, where do we even begin with those whistling sounds? That's not your average pronunciation lesson.
It's certainly a unique challenge. Remember those Peace Corps volunteers mentioned in the source? Learning Shona requires a real ear for tones, and those whistled sounds, or what we call whistled sibilants, they're a prime example.
Okay, break it down for us. How do these whistled sibilants actually work in Shona?
Picture this. Instead of voicing certain consonant combinations like SV, ZVs, TSV, or DZV, you whistle them. So it involves, shaping your tongue and lips as if you were about to say those sounds, but instead of pushing air out, you force it through this narrow channel, creating a whistling sound.
Wait, so you're telling me there are words in Shona where instead of saying SV, for example, you actually whistle it?
Precisely, and it's not just a random whistle. It has to be the specific sound of that consonant cluster.
Wow.
The source gives some amazing examples, but one that really captures this is the word for shooting stars. Masvozvababwa.
Masvozvabwa. I'm just trying to imagine hearing that spoken aloud.
Right.
It's incredible how a language can incorporate something we usually associate with, like, calling a cab or something, into its very structure.
Yeah.
It makes you realize how much we take for granted about how sounds work in our own languages.
Absolutely. And this intricate sound system is just one layer of Shona's complexity.
Right.
Remember those noun classes we touched upon earlier?
Right.
They're another example of how Shona challenges our assumptions about how language can work.
Right. It's like Shona has a secret code embedded within its grammar.
Damn.
Give us an example. How do these noun classes actually play out in the language?
Okay, so let's break it down with the word for person in Shona, which is munhu.
Okay.
Now, this word belongs to a specific noun class.
Okay.
And because of that, it dictates how other words around it will be formed.
Huh.
So if we're talking about multiple people, the word changes to vanhu due to its noun class.
Interesting.
English just doesn't have this level of intricacy built into its nouns.
Yeah.
It's kind of like grammatical gender in languages like Spanish or French, but way more extensive.
So each noun comes with a set of grammatical instructions, almost like a little passport telling other words how to behave around it.
That's a great way to put it.
It really makes English seem almost simple by comparison.
And this system of noun classes is a defining feature of Bantu languages, allowing Shona to be incredibly precise in how it conveys meaning.
Okay, I have to admit, I'm starting to get a little hooked on this whole noun class thing.
Yeah.
But let's shift gears for a moment and talk about Shona literature.
Okay.
The source mentioned the first Shona novel was published in 1957,
Right.
which feels surprisingly recent.
It is, and that timing is intrinsically linked to what we discussed earlier about the standardization of Shona in the 1920s.
Oh, right.
That effort, as controversial as it might have been, you see, it was fundamental in paving the way for a blossoming literary tradition.
Okay.
You need that standardized written form for novels and other literary works to truly flourish.
So it's like standardizing Shona didn't just create a unified language, it unlocked its potential for storytelling and artistic expression.
Exactly. It's fascinating how language evolution can go hand in hand with cultural development.
Wow.
And speaking of evolution, we have to circle back to the Shona alphabet itself, which has undergone some interesting transformations over the years.
Okay.
Before 1955, Shona used an alphabet developed by Clement Doak, a linguist who played a huge role in documenting and standardizing the language.
Wow.
This older version had special characters to represent those unique Shona sounds we were talking about, like the whistled sibilants.
So why this switch to the alphabet they use today? It seems counterintuitive to move away from a system specifically designed to capture those unique sounds.
It's a common theme in language evolution, the move toward greater accessibility.
Okay.
Switching to letters from the standard Latin alphabet, even if it meant using combinations to represent those special sounds, made Shona easier to learn for a wider range of people.
Right.
It's like simplifying the tools to allow more people to access the treasure trove of the language itself.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It's like opening up the world of Shona to a wider audience.
Right.
But it also makes you wonder what might have been lost in that transition.
Yeah.
Those special characters must have held a certain beauty and uniqueness.
Absolutely. And it speaks to the ongoing tension between preserving a language's heritage and ensuring its continued evolution and relevance in a changing world.
Yeah.
It's something to ponder, isn't it?
It's definitely food for thought. We've covered so much ground already, from those ear-catching whistled consonants to the intricacies of noun classes and the fascinating evolution of the Shona alphabet. It's amazing how much depth and complexity we've uncovered in just this short amount of time. We could spend, hours unpacking all the nuances, but for our listener who's short on time, let's bring it all home.
Yeah, we've barely scratched the surface.
But what does this all mean? Why should our listeners care about Shona, even if they never plan on becoming fluent themselves?
That's the beauty of language learning, even from a distance, right? It expands your perspective. Shona, with its unique sounds and grammatical structures, it challenges us to rethink our assumptions about how language can work. It highlights the incredible diversity of human expression.
It really makes you realize how much we just take for granted about our own language. We just assume that everyone categorizes the world the same way we do, but Shona's noun classes are whoa, that's not true at all.
Exactly. It's a powerful reminder of the vast tapestry of human experience and all the different lenses through which we each view the world.
It's like you're saying understanding the language gives you a deeper appreciation for the culture as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just about words. It's about connecting with a different way of seeing, hearing, and expressing ourselves.
Precisely. And, beyond that practical aspect, there's a certain magic to the sounds of Shona. We've talked about the whistled sibilants, but the language itself, it has this musicality to it. Imagine experiencing Shona poetry, music, or even just traditional storytelling.
Right.
It's a sensory experience that goes beyond just understanding the words themselves.
You've definitely sparked my curiosity. Any final thoughts for our listener before we wrap things up? What's one thing they can take away from this Shona deep dive?
If you're even just a little bit curious, I really encourage you to seek out some Shona music or poetry online. Even just listening to a few basic phrases will give you a taste of how unique and beautiful this language truly is.
What a great idea. You might even find yourself trying to master those whistled sibilants. Who knows, maybe we'll start a trend.
Oh, that would be something.
That's a wrap on our Shona deep dive. We hope you enjoyed this whirlwind tour of this incredible language. Until next time, keep those ears open and those minds curious.